I still remember the sound before I remembered the pain. My child's name, spoken too loudly, echoing through the school corridor. Parents froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped their phone. And there I was, standing straight, forcing my lips into a smile that didn't belong to me. The floor smelled of disinfectant. The bell rang somewhere far away. My ears buzzed, like my body was warning me before my heart could catch up. I felt it then, that sharp, humiliating heat crawling up my neck. I knew, in that moment, something had gone terribly wrong. I looked down at my child, small fingers wrapped around mine, trusting, safe. They had no idea what was happening, and I promised myself, right there, that whatever this was, they would never see me break. The words kept coming, accusations, assumptions, not shouted. Worse, calm, official, final. People were watching me, not with concern, but curiosity, as if my life had turned into a scene they didn't pay for but still felt entitled to watch. I wanted to ask one question, just one, but my throat closed before the thought could reach my mouth, because I knew who had done this. The person who was supposed to protect us. The one who knew every weakness, every fear, every sacrifice I had made in silence. My hands started shaking. I pressed them behind my back so no one would notice. I nodded when spoken to, even though I didn't hear half the words. Inside, something collapsed. I could feel tears pushing hard, demanding release. But I swallowed them, again and again. Not here, not in front of my children, not in front of strangers who didn't know the nights I stayed awake worrying about their future. When it was finally over, people slowly looked away, disappointed that there was no scene, no breakdown, no drama. I walked out with my child beside me, my steps steady, my spine straight. Every part of me was screaming, but my face stayed calm. Only when the car door closed did I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I didn't cry then either, because the question that haunted me was heavier than the pain itself. How could someone who knew how hard I fought for my children choose to destroy me like this? And why did it happen right when I thought we were finally safe? Before that day in the corridor, my life was built on quiet routines and invisible sacrifices, the kind no one applauds, the kind you make because you love someone more than yourself. I measured my days by my children's needs, lunchboxes before sunrise, homework after exhaustion, smiles I forced even when my body begged for rest. I learned how to stretch money, time, and patience until none of them belonged to me anymore. I told myself this was what love looked like. This relationship mattered because it wasn't just about me, it was the roof over my children's heads, the sense of safety I promised them, the belief that no matter how hard life got, someone had our back. I trusted completely, too completely. I shared fears I never spoke out loud, financial worries, private struggles, the kind of things you only tell someone when you believe they would never use them against you. I thought vulnerability made us stronger. I didn't realize I was handing over weapons. At first, everything felt stable, predictable, almost peaceful. But peace can be deceptive when you're desperate to believe in it. Small things began to change. Late responses, conversations that ended too quickly, decisions made without me. When I asked questions, I was told I was overthinking. When I hesitated, I was reminded of everything they had already done for us. So I stayed quiet. I blamed stress. I blamed circumstances. I blamed myself because it was easier than accepting that trust might be cracking. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to my children breathe in their sleep. I would promise myself that as long as they were safe, I could endure anything, even doubt, even loneliness. I convinced myself loyalty meant endurance. I ignored the feeling in my chest when plans changed without explanation. I ignored the way my opinion slowly stopped mattering. I ignored how often I felt like I needed permission just to exist. Every time something felt wrong, I reminded myself of the past, of the help, of the words once spoken with conviction. I clung to old memories like proof that I wasn't imagining things. But trust doesn't shatter all at once. It fractures quietly. I noticed how information was kept from me, how important conversations happened when I wasn't around, how decisions affecting my children were discussed as if I were a problem to manage, not a parent to respect. Still, I stayed, because leaving felt scarier than doubting, because I believed protecting my children meant keeping everything together no matter the cost to me. I smiled through discomfort. I accepted explanations that didn't sit right. I told myself that stability mattered more than my instincts. Deep down, though, something was shifting. I started double-checking things I never questioned before, reading between the lines, listening not just to words, but to tone. Silence began to feel louder than arguments ever could. And yet, I never imagined betrayal would come in the way it did. I never thought it would involve my dignity, my reputation, my role as a parent. I truly believe that even if things fell apart privately, some lines would never be crossed. That belief kept me blind, because while I was busy holding everything together for my children, someone else was quietly loosening the ground beneath my feet, and I had no idea how close I was to losing everything I thought was secure. The betrayal didn't arrive with shouting or warnings. It came disguised as a normal day. I was in the middle of my routine, the kind that keeps you moving without thinking. My phone buzzed. Once. Then again, messages I didn't recognize, missed calls from a number I hadn't saved. At first, I ignored them. I had learned to ignore distractions. My life demanded it. Then I read the words. My body reacted before my mind did. My hands went cold. My stomach tightened so hard it felt like I'd been punched from the inside. I reread the message, hoping the meaning would change if I stared long enough. It didn't. The betrayal was already in motion, carefully planned, officially framed. Decisions about my children, about me, made without my knowledge, without my consent, without even the decency of a warning. I remember sitting down slowly, like the ground had shifted under me. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Every sound around me became distant, as if I were underwater. I told myself there had to be a misunderstanding. There always is, right? I searched for explanations that would make this hurt less. Maybe someone exaggerated. Maybe paperwork had been misunderstood. Maybe this wasn't intentional. But the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The person who knew my schedule, my fears, my financial limits, used all of it. They knew exactly when I'd be most vulnerable. They knew how to make it look official, reasonable, justified. And worst of all, they knew it would humiliate me. I felt torn in two directions. One part of me wanted to confront them immediately, demand answers, scream until the truth fell out. The other part wanted to disappear, to pretend I'd never seen the messages, to protect my children from the chaos I could feel coming. Denial whispered comforting lies. Reality waited patiently. I replayed past conversations in my head, the reassurances, the promises, the moments I doubted myself and apologized when I shouldn't have. Each memory rearranged itself into something darker. My chest ached, not just from pain, but from the realization that I had trusted someone who was already planning my downfall. I tried to call. No answer. That silence said more than any confession ever could. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone.
I barely recognized the person looking back at me. Someone who had believed loyalty would be returned. Someone who thought sacrifice would be respected. In that moment, the weight of it hit me all at once. This betrayal wasn't just about control or power. It was about erasing me as a parent, as a voice, as a person who mattered. I felt anger rise, sharp and unfamiliar. Then fear followed close behind. What would this mean for my children, for our future, for everything I had worked to protect? I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay still. I couldn't fall apart yet, not now, not when so much was at stake. But something inside me changed forever that day. The illusion I'd been holding on to finally cracked. And even though I wasn't ready to admit it out loud, I knew one thing with painful clarity. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a fight I never asked for, but could no longer avoid.
After the betrayal surfaced, nothing felt solid anymore. Every day carried a quiet threat, like something could collapse without warning. Clues started appearing everywhere, small, unsettling signs I couldn't ignore now, even if I wanted to. Documents that didn't add up, timelines that conflicted, people suddenly knowing details about my life I never shared with them. Each discovery tightened the pressure around my chest. I began questioning everything. Every past conversation, every decision made without me, every moment I was told to relax or stop worrying. What once sounded reassuring now felt calculated. Sleep became rare. My mind refused to rest. I would lie awake replaying scenarios, imagining outcomes I was terrified to face, losing control, losing credibility, losing my children's trust if things turned ugly. During the day, I acted normal. I packed lunches, I answered questions, I smiled when I was supposed to, but inside, I was constantly bracing for impact. I felt trapped between two impossible choices: speak up and risk making things worse, or stay silent and let the situation spiral further out of my control. Every option felt like a loss. The pressure wasn't just emotional, it was practical. Time limits, deadlines, official procedures moving forward without waiting for me to catch up. It felt like a train already speeding ahead while I was still standing on the tracks. I noticed how easily my concerns were dismissed, how my words suddenly carried less weight. The narrative was being shaped without me, and I was always one step behind it. That helplessness was suffocating. I wanted to fight back, but fear held me still. Fear of retaliation, fear of being painted as unstable, fear that any wrong move would be used against me. The person who betrayed me seemed calm, confident, almost untouchable. That confidence made everything worse. It made me question my own reality. I started doubting my instincts again, wondering if I was exaggerating, if I was reading too much into things. Gaslighting doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it comes from watching someone act unbothered while your world burns. The stress began leaking into my body. Headaches that wouldn't fade, a constant tightness in my chest. I caught myself snapping at small things, then immediately feeling guilty. My children noticed something was off. They didn't ask questions, but they watched me more closely. That hurt the most. I hated that they could sense my fear, that my struggle was bleeding into the safe space I tried so hard to protect for them. It made the pressure unbearable. Every new sign felt like a warning that I was running out of time, that the truth, whatever it was, would surface whether I was ready or not. I gathered fragments quietly, not confronting, just observing, listening, remembering. I didn't yet know what I would do with the information, but instinct told me I would need it. Still, doubt lingered. What if I was wrong? What if pushing back destroyed whatever stability we had left? That question haunted me constantly. I stood at the edge of action, frozen by the weight of consequences. The tension kept building day after day, with no release in sight. But deep down, beneath the fear and exhaustion, something else was growing. A quiet realization. If I stayed silent much longer, the story would be finished without me ever telling my side. And that thought was more terrifying than any confrontation waiting ahead. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The pressure had built to a point where doing nothing felt more dangerous than speaking up. The confrontation didn't happen the way I imagined. There was no dramatic setting, no raised voices, just a tense moment where everything unsaid finally demanded space between us. I chose my words carefully, too carefully. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I asked for clarity, hoping for honesty, hoping, against everything I already knew, that there was still room for explanation. The response was calm, almost practiced. There was no apology, no hesitation, just confidence, the kind that comes from believing you've already won. That was when I realized how far the situation had escalated. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was control. They spoke as if my concerns were inconveniences, as if my pain was irrelevant, as if the decisions affecting my children and my future were theirs alone to make. The arrogance in that moment hurt more than the betrayal itself. I felt myself shrinking, not because I was weak, but because the weight of what was happening pressed down hard. I was being dismissed in real time, reduced to someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of involvement were left. One comment landed like a slap, not loud, not cruel on the surface, just sharp enough to remind me exactly where they thought I belonged. That was my breaking point. I felt something crack inside my chest, not into pieces, but open, raw, exposed. The fear I'd been carrying started turning into something else. Anger. Not reckless anger, focused anger. I realized this confrontation wasn't about resolving anything. It was about asserting dominance, about seeing how far I could be pushed before I stopped pushing back. I stood there, listening, absorbing every word. The dismissive tone, the subtle threats disguised as logic, the way responsibility was shifted onto me without hesitation. They were testing me, and I was failing that test by trying to remain reasonable. I walked away before my emotions betrayed me, not because I was defeated, but because I understood something important. Reacting in that moment would only give them more control. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped. From that point on, the conflict lived in everything. Texts felt loaded, silences felt intentional. Every interaction carried tension, like a wire pulled too tight. The stakes became painfully clear. This wasn't about pride or winning an argument. It was about who would define the truth, who would be believed, who would be left standing when everything settled. I felt closer than ever to losing everything I worked for, my voice, my role, my sense of security. And yet, buried beneath the fear, a new determination took shape. I stopped trying to convince them of my worth. I started paying attention. Because if they were this confident, this dismissive, it meant they believed the truth would never surface. And that meant there was something they were desperately hoping I'd never find. That realization changed how I saw the conflict. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was the moment I understood the rules had changed, and that surviving it would require more than just enduring the pain. The shift didn't come with relief. It came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. After the confrontation, I stopped reacting and started observing. I moved through my days carefully, listening more than speaking, watching patterns I had been too exhausted to notice before. The chaos around me hadn't slowed, but something inside me had gone still. That stillness made space for the unexpected. It started with a message I almost ignored. The name wasn't familiar, and normally I wouldn't have opened it, but something told me not to dismiss it. Not this time. The words were cautious, measured, someone reaching out without knowing if they'd be welcomed. They didn't accuse or assume, they simply said they had information I should see. My heart raced as I read it. This wasn't emotion, it was evidence. Not the kind that explodes instantly, but the kind that rearranges everything once you understand it. Dates, records, details that connected too neatly to be coincidence, pieces that filled the gaps I'd been questioning for months. For the first time since this began, the fog started to lift. I went back through old messages with new eyes. Conversations that once felt confusing now made sense. The delays, the dismissals, the confidence during our confrontation, it all aligned into a pattern I could no longer deny. I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't been overreacting. I hadn't been wrong. That realization was both terrifying and empowering. Another unexpected source followed, then another. Quiet confirmations from places I never thought to look. People who had stayed silent either out of fear or uncertainty now found the courage to speak. The truth wasn't screaming, it was assembling itself. Each piece shifted the balance. The person who once seemed untouchable now looked careless, overconfident, so certain I would never push far enough to uncover what they'd hidden in plain sight. I felt control returning, not as revenge, but as clarity. For the first time, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was thinking strategically, choosing when to speak, when to wait, when to document instead of confront. The power dynamic changed without anyone else realizing it yet. I noticed it in their behavior. The confidence faded slightly, responses became cautious, assurances grew defensive. They sensed something had shifted, even if they didn't know what. And I said nothing. That silence became my strength. I focused on protecting my children, maintaining stability on the surface while preparing beneath it. I didn't need to expose the truth yet. Timing mattered. Rushing would only weaken its impact. Patience became my weapon. There were moments when fear crept back in, when I wondered if I was strong enough to follow through. But then I'd look at the evidence, at the clear picture forming, and the doubt would fade. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no announcement, no visible victory. Just a quiet certainty settling inside me. I knew what had been done. I knew who was responsible, and I knew I no longer stood alone in this fight. The truth was no longer something I was chasing. It was something I was holding. And when the moment came to release it, everything would change.
When the truth finally surfaced, it didn't arrive the way I once imagined. There was no shouting, no dramatic entrance, no moment of chaos. It was worse than that. It was undeniable. The setting was controlled, official, the kind of place where words carry weight and silence can ruin lives. I walked in calm, not because I wasn't scared, but because fear had already burned itself out. I had nothing left to lose by speaking. Everything I had gathered, the messages, the timelines, the quiet confirmations, came together in a way that left no room for interpretation. Each piece supported the next. Every gap had been filled. As the truth unfolded, I watched faces change. Confusion first, then discomfort, then realization. The story that had been carefully constructed around me began to collapse. The version where I was unreliable, emotional, difficult. That narrative couldn't survive contact with facts. The person who betrayed me tried to hold their composure. I could see it in the way they shifted, the way their confidence drained slowly, replaced by something tight and defensive. They didn't deny everything. They couldn't. Too much was visible now. The room felt heavy, not tense, exposed. Each revelation hit harder than the last, not because it was shocking, but because it explained everything. Every dismissal, every decision made behind my back, every moment I was made to feel small. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was witnessing. The power I'd lost came back all at once. Not loud, not aggressive, but solid, grounded, real. I could feel it in my chest, steady and unwavering. For the first time, I wasn't asking to be believed. I was being proven right. The betrayal stood naked in the open. No excuses could soften it. No charm could redirect it. The truth didn't care about intentions or justifications. It simply existed. I thought I would feel satisfaction in that moment. I didn't. What I felt was release. Years of doubt drained out of me. The exhaustion, the fear of being misunderstood, the shame of questioning myself. It all loosened its grip at once. I looked at the person who had caused so much damage, and what I saw surprised me. Not power, not authority, just someone exposed by their own choices. The justice didn't come from punishment or raised voices. It came from clarity, from watching lies fail in the presence of truth. The room didn't need my anger. It needed honesty. And honesty did what emotion never could. When it was over, there was no applause, no victory speech, just a quiet shift in how I was seen, how my voice was acknowledged, how my role as a parent and a person was restored. The truth didn't explode outward, it exploded inward, breaking the hold the betrayal had on me. I walked out feeling lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because the weight was no longer carried alone. The story had changed, the balance had shifted, and for the first time since this began, I knew something with certainty. Whatever came next, it would be built on truth, not fear.
After the truth came out, nothing returned to how it was before. But it didn't need to. The consequences unfolded quietly, one by one. Decisions were reversed, authority shifted. The control that once felt absolute slipped away from the person who abused it. There was no dramatic punishment, no public shaming, just accountability doing its slow, unavoidable work. And that was enough. I focused on my children, on rebuilding the sense of safety I had fought so hard to protect. They never knew the full weight of what I carried, and I intended to keep it that way. Their laughter returned first. Their ease followed. Seeing that reminded me why I endured everything in silence. Healing wasn't immediate. Some nights the memories resurfaced, the humiliation, the fear, the loneliness, but they didn't control me anymore. They were echoes, not commands. I cried alone one last time. Not from pain, but from release. I let myself grieve the version of life I thought I had, the trust I gave too freely, the person I was before everything broke. Letting go of that was harder than holding on to anger. But in that letting go, I found something stronger. Self-respect. I no longer needed validation from anyone who had tried to erase me. I no longer questioned my instincts or apologized for existing. I learned that endurance is not weakness, and silence, when chosen, can be power. The betrayal left scars, but it also left clarity. I now knew what I would never tolerate again. I knew how strong I could be without raising my voice. And I knew that protecting my children sometimes meant protecting myself first. The weight didn't disappear overnight, but it lifted enough for me to breathe again. Peace didn't come as happiness. It came as steadiness. If you're listening to this and you've ever swallowed your pain so others wouldn't see you break, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who knew your weakest points, know this: your silence does not erase the truth. It only delays its arrival. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life emotional stories. Comment if you've ever faced something similar, and share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Sometimes telling the story is the final act of healing.